everybody, and welcome to a special episode of the Partial Historians Meets the Life of Caesar podcast. I am Dr. Rad, and to my left is...
Dr. G. Welcome, everyone.
And above us, in a state not too far away, we have...
Dr. Cam. Not really a doctor, kind of like Dr. Nick, a doctor. So just call me Cam. But take two of these and call me in the morning if it doesn't get any better.
Hi, Dr. Cam.
These two pills are for history, and today's medicine is all about Tiberius.
Oh, nice.
Well, thanks for doing a podcast with me. It's nice to be talking to Australians for a change. Much, obviously, generally much higher intelligence and of much better senses of humour than our counterparts across the pond.
We can really hit those accent notes correctly on the nicknames you've developed. You know, for good old Tibbo, for Tibbo.
Tibbo. Yeah, so we're going to talk about Tibbo today, and as I understand it, one of you is pro Tibbo, the other is anti Tibbo.
Yes, yes, Dr. Rad. Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Rad, and I am a Tiberius fan.
You're on the 12-step program.
I am.
We admitted we were powerless over Tibbo, that our lives had become unmanageable. And I don't really have a view on Tibbo, but Ray and I, for our listeners, know that we're about halfway through a linear timeline. So I'm interested to get your perspective, seeing as you both actually have an education, something that, well, Ray claims to have a degree in history, but I think he got it out of a cornflakes packet, quite honestly. So I'm interested to get your respective perspectives on Tibbo, pro and against. Right. So from where I'm at with Tibbo, it seems to me like he has been reluctant pretty much all the way along, and generally gets to a point where he's just like, fuck it, I'm going to go build a sex dungeon. I'm interested in well, first of all, who's Dr. Fiona? You're the pro Tibbo half of the duo?
I am. I know it's a controversial opinion. Dr. G over here is much more of a fan of Augustus, but who I hate because I see him as the reason for Tiberius's unhappiness. I think of Tiberius's life as like a country song, and I just can't help but feel very, very sorry for him. And so
Augustus shot his dog and stole his wife and his pickup.
Pretty much, yeah. He did
actually tell him to get rid of his wife.
He did, yeah.
So
he was the one that told him there's no more dancing in this country town. The teenagers aren't allowed to do that anymore. He took everything from Tiberius.
That is true. Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we start by you telling us why you're a big fan of Tiberius?
Well, I kind of see him as being a very traditional Roman. And I kind of see him as stuck between two worlds. I think he's a sort of Republican at heart who's forced to take on responsibility. And because he's so pious, because he has so much duty to his family, he keeps taking on these roles. Dr. G's mocking me with her hands right now. But yeah, he keeps taking on these roles. He does what he should, duty-wise for Augustus, and that ends up really screwing him over. And so I just, I can't help but going after a man like that, especially after the story that is recorded in the ancient sources of him gazing longingly when he sees the wife that he was made to divorce across the market, and now he has to be gently led away by people around him going, come on, Tiberius, come on.
I feel like the only way that you can generate sympathy for this guy is by saying, look, he looks fondly upon his first wife. It's maybe not enough to get this guy over the line. I raise my hand. I'm the anti-Tibbo.
You're being a dick.
Yeah, listen, we have basically 3 rules on our show. One is never accept an invitation to a banquet in your honor because you're bound to get assassinated. Number 2 is don't make me pull a Sulla. Number 3 is D-back. Don't be a C word. I'm not going to say it for your audience. I don't know how sensitive your audience is. I don't know if the levels of swearing are as high in your audience.
We do have our special favorite apparently is douche.
Oh, that's... Okay, yeah. That's fairly light in our world. Yeah. Vipsania, he does, and then he has to deal with her husband who's a senator, her next husband.
I know, and he does not like him. It doesn't go well.
No, doesn't go well for him, certainly in the end. So, look, I agree with you that he kind of had his life ruined in many ways by Augustus, but then
he owes his whole
he's rich
life.
and powerful.
His whole life is owed to Augustus. Let's pause right there.
All right, fine.
I mean, by all means, let's like Augustus can get the whip.
Yeah.
All right. For like the things that ruined Tiberius's life.
Yeah.
But Tiberius wouldn't have had a life at all if it wasn't for Augustus. So I think we need to keep this in mind.
I'm sorry. Was
well.
he his father? Was he his biological father? I'm going to get technical on you. No, he was not.
No, he was not. But who takes that young boy under his wing after
Once
he
he's
takes
stolen his
Livia?
mother. Once he's stolen his mother while she's 6 months pregnant.
I think a guy who's willing to take on a woman who's already got a ship on board, etc., etc.
That's why he took her on, because he needed a son.
And then looks after those two boys, raises them as if they were his own.
He did not, and you know it.
Doesn't treat his own children very well either, we might add.
He only took an interest in them when it was clear that there was no son forthcoming, and you know it.
I'm just saying. Yeah. Tiberius gets his whole career through Augustus. He is elevated early beyond the age constraint.
He's still an elite Roman. He would have had a career regardless.
Yeah, but that's different to the career he gets. And the career he gets leads him to being the imperator and the princeps of Rome.
Yeah, eventually. But he has to suffer through all the heartache. And I don't think he really wanted to be princeps of Rome.
Oh, I'm not going to feel sorry for a guy who gets accused of using small babies before they're weaned to look after his business downstairs.
Total gossip. Total gossip. And you know it. You know it.
It's in Suetonius. I've got source material for this.
Yeah. So, Cameron, I know you said that Tiberius built a sex dungeon. Do you seriously believe in the sex dungeon stories?
I want to believe in them. A man's got to have ambition. Let's go back to the Vipsania thing. So I was having this discussion with somebody on Facebook the other day. Do you think the idea of romantic love was a thing at all in the early 1st century CE, particularly for the Roman elite? When did the idea of romantic love really get invented?
I think you could actually read these stories of the romantic love that Tiberius has for Vipsania as a critique of him in source material. Because this is not how Roman matches work, not at a level of the patrician class. They're political, that's it. The fact that Tiberius has these feelings is a criticism. He's supposed to move on. He's supposed to do his job. And reputedly, Julia was interested in him before he even had the divorce come through. So she was up for it. This issue of romantic love, it's not impossible, but it's not considered to be necessary in any way whatsoever to the machinations.
I kind of think as well that you would believe in this, Dr. G, because after all, we've spoken about this relationship a number of times, but Augustus and Livia, I'm going to put it out there. He obviously is interested in her because she's an elite, she's fertile, she's produced sons successfully. He is lacking in that department. But there seems to be something more going on, because once it turns out that there's no flames to that fire, they stick together for decades, and he could have easily just divorced her and found someone else.
Yeah, but I think Augustus plays by his own rules, and he forces everybody else to play by those same rules. And the things that are the things that are good for him are not necessarily the things that are good for everybody else.
No, but I'm just saying in terms of romantic love existing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's a genuine case. But I also think that by representing Tiberius as having feelings, it's a criticism.
Yeah. What do you think, Cam? How have you read Augustus and Livia's relationship? Do you see it as romantic or?
Yeah, no, that's a fascinating one. I mean, they obviously did stick together, and they seemed to travel a lot. She would accompany him a lot, particularly in the later years. I mean, I can't read any romance into it, honestly. I think it was Bill and Hillary Clinton to a certain extent. I think it was not. Look, I think they got along with each other. I think they understood each other. I think he probably. We know he used to deflower young maidens. That's in one of the sources. I remember we had a lot of fun with the word deflower for a long time after that. So he was still banging hot young things all over the place well into late age.
Yeah.
Certainly there wasn't sexual fidelity there, and I don't think anyone expected that of Augustus or any other patrician male at the time. Just, have it with sex with the right people in the right ways. So I don't think it was love as we think of it today.
No, not as we think of it.
No. Don't think that existed at that. I think Petrarch kind of invented that 1,300 years later.
Interesting.
Anywho,
Yeah.
Let's get back to Tibbo.
Yeah.
So, yes, I agree that he probably, even though he's got a Claudian ancestry, where things were at after the Second Triumvirate, if Augustus hadn't fancied his mother, then he probably didn't have the brightest of careers ahead of him. But he does seem to be like a bit of a mopey, whiny little bitch for a lot of that time, right? Like when it seems evident that Agrippa's boys, Julia's boys, are gonna really be the heirs to the throne, he just takes his bat and his ball and he fucks off into self-exile.
Oh, yeah. He goes on a bit of a hissy fit about that and then organises for them to be done away with on some level.
Well, okay, it's not like, he's not responsible for their death. That's stretching.
Oh, no, I'm thinking about Germanicus's son.
I was going to say, he wasn't.
Narrative.
I was going to say, he's not responsible for that.
He does go to Rhodes.
He does, but I kind of see that as Augustus always, Tiberius is one of those people that helps Augustus set himself up well and be regarded well, because he does the kind of stuff that Augustus doesn't seem to be particularly good at himself. Tiberius is an awesome general. And he does a good job in that area. And I think that he doesn't like the fact that Augustus underappreciated him. I think he promoted him, yes, because he's Livia's son and he's part of the family and whatever. But I think he constantly passed him over for people with that direct Julian bloodline. And he did do that. You can't deny it.
Oh, I have no intention of doing so. I think it was the right decision, and it's a real shame that he ended up being in the Princeps. I've got to slide in my criticisms where I can right now.
It's hard to tell. Like, if you read Tacitus, for example, Tacitus paints Tibbo out as being a real party pooper. Just doesn't like the people, doesn't like his job, doesn't like anybody, doesn't like his mother, doesn't like Julia, probably for good reason. But again, we have to keep in mind that we can't really take Tacitus at face value either. He's writing at a particular time with a particular political intent. Is he deliberately trying to badmouth the Julio-Claudians from Tacitus onwards?
Yes, he is.
In that narrative, it seems pretty clear that the favoured figure is Germanicus. And part of the way that Tacitus structures that history is to avoid talking about Tiberius when he really could. And instead focusing on the campaigns that Germanicus is involved in.
Yeah, but what's the thing that Germanicus has going for him that no other Julio-Claudian does at this time? He never became princeps. So he doesn't do the Batman thing where he lives long enough to see himself become the villain.
All superhero references. I like where this is going.
Yeah, and that's why Germanicus is allowed to be the hero, because he dies prematurely. Tiberius, on the other hand, lives long enough to see himself become the bad guy.
And I think Tacitus also has some problems with the fact that, one, he really wants it to still be a republic. That's his first wish.
Yeah.
And the fact that Tiberius, in the guise of princeps, or in the actuality of princeps, is trying to build consensus politics with the Senate, just makes him infuriated. And we're like, well, we should just have a republic. Like, this is the whole point.
Well, see, this is where you should like him, Dr. G, because Augustus worked for so long to set up this new system, and really it's Tiberius that makes sure it's a success, because he's the one that sees it through the rough patch of Augustus dying after decades and decades of dominating.
Through the rough patch.
Yeah, he does. It could have all fallen apart.
He turns around to the Senate and says, let's all work together. And they're so out of characteristic of being able to do that, because Augustus has trained them to not be a functional Senate, that they just like, well, no, you're the princeps now. You make the decision. And Tiberius is like, well, guess what, guys? I need to go on another trip.
Hang on a second. He doesn't go anywhere. He stays in Rome for a while.
For a while.
For a while. For a long while. For over a decade. Thank you very much.
Sex dungeons don't build themselves.
That's right,
They take a lot of planning, a lot of work, a lot of chains have to be bought.
And he's not going to move until it's all complete.
Suits. Exactly. Nothing worse than a half-built sex dungeon. Like, we all know that from experience. So, the thing with the Senate is fascinating. You know, we were talking this week in our series about Tacfarinas or Taco, the rise again of Taco, and Tibbo turns to the Senate. He says, "Listen, I'm sex dungeoning. Can you appoint someone to go and deal with this?" And they wet themselves and say, "No, we can't do that." So, you know, whose fault is that, though? You're blaming Augustus, and I understand why, because he's basically hamstrung the Senate for 2 generations. But these are Romans. Why can't they stand up and pull their big boy pants on and get the job done?
Because they've been, I think this is part of the issue of this transference from republic to empire, and it's still a teething job. And Tiberius has inherited this system that works with Augustus's personality. And I think this is the real issue, is that Tiberius is getting perhaps unfairly maligned in some of our source material.
Thank you.
That's my confession.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Because he's a different personality, because he's not consulting the same sort of personal counsels that Augustus had created for himself. And he also doesn't have Augustus's background in just flushing out the Senate of the families and the people that don't work for him.
Yes, that's one thing that Tiberius does, which this is the thing. It depends on how you want to read it as to whether it's his credit or not. He doesn't carry out the same level of senatorial purges that Augustus had during his reign. And he doesn't seem to, for most of his reign, he doesn't take personal criticism to heart. He's okay with people criticizing him.
There's the point where he has a breakdown.
There is a point, but you know what? You would too under those circumstances. Let me get to that
and
later.
And he's never quite the same after the breakdown.
But yeah, he doesn't mind personal criticism, and he hates personal flattery. It's just a totally different ballpark to what the kind of guy that Augustus was, I think.
I don't think Augustus was big on personal flattery either. He used to shut people down. Yeah. He used to shut people down all the time, didn't he?
Yeah, but he doesn't mind being called the father of the fatherland.
And he doesn't mind having, poets singing the virtues of, people related to him and whatnot.
And he doesn't mind one of his mates getting up and being like, why don't we call him Augustus?
And he doesn't mind having his res gestae put in bronze tablets all over the empire.
And he doesn't mind.
Okay, but apart from those things, he was very humble.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, no, fair point.
Yeah.
But Augustus was... Okay, so let's get back to the whole transition of the Republic to the Empire. I mean, I read a lot of criticism still today of Augustus and his role in that. My view and Ray's view, because Ray agrees with everything I say, is that the Republic was it was a mess. By the Gracchi onwards, it was a complete mess. It had broken down. It was the United States today. Nothing was working. It was just a shadow of what it had once been. It was never perfect, but the wheels had well and truly come off, and it's very hard to see how they could have been put back on again. And Augustus has to shoulder the responsibility of rebuilding Rome in a new model that's not going to kill itself within a generation. I mean, do you disagree with any of that?
I give him credit for that. And I think the thing is, Tacitus comes in very heavy-handed with the Julio-Claudians, because I definitely think he has an axe to grind about the system. It's not really about them as personalities as his main... that's not his main focus. It's really he has to go for the personalities because he's criticizing the system. But Tacitus never lived under the Republic. He has this starry-eyed, nostalgic view of something he's never actually experienced. And I agree, the Republic wasn't working by the time that all this... Obviously, that's why, civil wars had erupted.
And I think the thing is that the Republic is always a bit of a movable feast. It's never a fixed entity. You can't pin it down and be like, oh, that's the moment where the Republic was really working. It's always a work in progress. It's always shifting in the way that it operates. And all the Gracchi do is really reveal one of the push points that hasn't really been pushed yet. and once they do that, other people start looking around and be like, oh, wait a minute, this thing's just built on layers of tradition and understanding. And if I can find a gap somewhere, there's also another push point. And that's, you get Sulla, you get Marius, you get Caesar, and it's not at all of a surprise, I think, that by the time we get to Octavian as a 19-year-old, that something has to give. It's unfortunate that we have so much Cicero in this respect, because he makes a big deal about it. And the Republic is this thing for him. But I don't know.
There's a reason.
I think
there's a reason we call him Dickero.
There's a reason his tongue ended up with a hairpin through it.
Yeah, exactly.
So we get this situation where it's like, well, maybe what Augustus did is not necessarily the best thing for the Republic, but it is something. And he does cobble it together, but it is a cult of personality. That seems pretty clear. And the moment that you begin to really realize that is a couple of years into Tiberius's position, because he's been given just about all of the same sort of legal power that Augustus had held. Augustus had basically transferred it all to him. Mm-hmm. But the way he decides to deploy it is very different. And that's what's upsetting people, because they're not sure what the best way is to respond to this, because it's out of the pattern that they're now used to.
What do you think about the suggestion in some of the sources that Augustus actually never planned for one man to have the same power after him, that it should be a small council to take over?
Sounds like a lame idea.
Yeah, I don't agree. He very carefully, like once it became clear after about 4 AD, it was pretty clear that it was going to be Tiberius. And I think Augustus is pretty careful in setting Tiberius up to have, as Dr. G said, all the powers that he would need to take over if and when, well, not if, he obviously would die someday.
And you also see so much movement from Augustus to try and set up a family line.
Yeah.
And it just goes wrong all the time.
Yeah. The fact that he makes Tiberius adopt Germanicus,
yeah,
he's obviously trying to make sure that even though Tiberius has to be the one to probably take over in the short term, he wants to make sure it comes back to the Julian bloodline in the end.
But if we go back 10 years before that, we go back to before Tibbo took his baptismal ball and went off to study philosophy.
Yeah.
There did seem to be an effort on behalf of Augustus to set up, yes, a number of his family, but to have a handful of them that would be able to keep the ship moving after he died. But then they all died except Tibbo. And, he famously, when Tibbo comes back, gives that speech to the Senate, he's like, listen, fuck it, I'm not very happy about this, but that's all we got. I got Tibbo. Look, trust me, no one...
guys, I love this man. I don't know if I told you.
No one's unhappier about this than I am, but I got to tell you that he's the best that I got. So, in the event of my death, Tibbo will be looking after things until Germanicus is old enough. Thank you very much.
And you see, that is the tragedy of Tiberius right there. He is constantly... Even though he does everything Augustus asks of him, he's constantly given the shaft.
Because how can you respect somebody who just does everything you say?
I'm sorry.
That's like my relationship with Ray. Yeah. Now it's all making sense.
I
just have an opinion.
Jump in there.
Augustus, this is part of familias. He is doing the pious thing.
Yeah.
Okay, if he didn't do it, you'd be saying what a dick he was for not doing it.
It depends on what he did instead.
Oh.
I tell you what, if he'd started out being like in 14, being like, okay, guys, I've got all the power now, straight to the sex dungeon. I don't know how I feel about that, but I definitely have an opinion.
Okay, here's a question for you, Cam. If Tiberius had died in 26 AD, how do you think that would have affected his reputation?
Look, I think his reputation in Rome doesn't... Well, again, if you take Tacitus at his word, Tiberius wasn't very popular particularly after the death of Germanicus. I don't think he was ever very popular. People were comparing him to his brother. They were comparing him to Augustus, and he just didn't shape up. Doesn't matter how good a general he was, how sturdy an administrator he was, how loyal he was. He just seems to have been, boring and grumpy and not the kind of person that you want to have as your head of state. So look, I don't think maybe like the whole sex dungeon Sejanus period, we wouldn't have to point at him. But if he had died, who would have taken over? Sejanus? Would he have taken over then himself and gone off in that direction, which wouldn't have been a good thing? Okay, probably wouldn't have gone to Caligula, but I can't imagine it would have been a happy ending for anyone. Then we'd be saying, well, why didn't he do it? A bit like Barack Obama. You had 8 years, in that case 12. Yeah, why didn't you do something? You had control of both houses for 4 of those. Well, 2. But why didn't you do something? Like, you could have passed laws. You could have changed. You could have restored the Republic. You could have done all these things. You did nothing. I think that's what we'd be saying about Tacitus now, right?
I feel like this is where Tiberius is maybe at the mercy of his own history in a way, because he's always been set up to follow. And he does follow, and it turns out he's a great general as long as somebody else above him has the master plan.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He does not really go on campaigns after he becomes princeps.
Oh, did Augustus?
I'm just saying, we don't see any evidence that he's capable of that kind of generalship after he comes to power.
He's 50
You didn't want Augustus. You didn't want Augustus going on campaigns. He had a tendency to curl up in a little ball and put his thumb in his mouth.
Exactly. Thank you.
And just whimper.
Oh yeah, well he gets sick a lot. I mean, it's unfortunate that he's got a poor constitution. Yeah. But aside from that, so like Tiberius is great at these things. So you think to yourself, he's good at leading an army. He's good at directing things on a battlefield. Surely that's transferable to the political arena. But it appears like either the source material is not doing him justice for not taking a general's approach to the Senate, or he's just only good when he's got somebody above him telling him what to do.
Augustus did not tell him what to do in campaigns. There is no proof of that.
But Augustus was the one who sent him out there and said, conquer something for me, buddy.
And he did it because
prove your worth.
He did, and he did prove his worth.
You're like, I don't know if I want to make you my man. You're going to have to show me. Give me something real, Tibbo.
So let's change track a little bit.
Yeah.
On our show, because there are no women,
there are no women.
No, well, Ray's kind of half woman, I think, but we don't have a very high opinion of Julia the elder. I tend to refer to her as Julia the slut whore, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not trying to slut shame her, but again, according to the sources, she was fucking anything that would move in Rome and doing it drunken and on the forum sometimes, which I'm like, hey, more power to you. But do you think that the historical accounts of her are fair? Has she been maligned by later historians? And if not, how do you explain Julia's role in all of this?
I think she probably has been unfairly maligned to a certain degree because of the nature of the source material that we have. Like, there's just no way with all of these male-authored sources and the way that they expect women to behave in the public arena, that they're going to give any of the Julio-Claudian women a light time. So they're all up for criticism in particular ways. And it seems like what Julia does is really try to build a life for herself within the constraints that she finds herself within. So it's like there's always dad telling her what to do. There's marriages that she has to make. There's the people that she has to sleep with. So she's like, well, you know what? I am a Julian. Maybe I will do what I want. Maybe I can't hold political power. Maybe this is my best avenue. Making the most of a bad situation, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, she is married after the first marriage fell apart because her husband died quite young, as tends to happen with all Julio-Claudian men. She was married to someone older than her father.
Marcellus?
Yeah, Marcellus
the first?
Yeah.
And then she gets married to Agrippa next.
She's older than her father.
Not by much, but okay.
Well, yeah, but her father.
No, I think it counts. You know,
when you're a young girl.
Look at your dad, and then think, would I want to do a man older than my dad? I mean, the answer is usually no.
Old man butt. That's all I'm saying. So yeah, I kind of.
As an older man, I find that very offensive. I have to say.
I think Agrippa was probably a little more battle.
I'm not casting aspersions upon old men in general.
No.
Just old men older than your own father.
Sure. Well, my father's dead, so I mean, I can't think about that.
Being married to another corpse. Oh, goodness me.
Yeah, no, I think Julia. I mean, look. From our source material, we kind of think that a lot of women in the elite circles anyway were probably carrying on in a similar way. I mean, Augustus's moral legislation suggests that women are taking a bit more back for themselves at that time period. And so I kind of think Julia is perhaps a part of a group of people who are behaving in this sort of a way. But obviously the stakes are so much higher when you're the princeps' only child.
And how did she misread that? Like, I mean, maybe she thought he would, I don't know, put her in timeout or, something. But, I mean, he was so harsh.
I think now, he was untouchable.
Yeah.
Well, there's also a suggestion in, I can't remember which source it is, but let's go with Tacitus, the suggestion that she was plotting a conspiracy with, I think, Marcus Antonius's son to overthrow either Augustus or whoever came after Augustus, Tiberius or whatever, to ensure that it was her children that would have the throne. Do you put any stock in the conspiracy theories?
Not from my end. I'd have to read more up on that, actually, because I feel like that's something that at the moment I can't speak to.
I know that she was definitely accused of sleeping with, amongst others, Iulus Antonius, which does seem to cast a political dimension to her doings. But I kind of agree that a lot of the Julio-Claudian women are accused of sleeping around in order to sort of bind men to them and therefore to their children. You know, Agrippina the Younger comes up against similar criticism, as does Messalina. You know, they're all accused of sleeping around. And there's potentially a little bit of truth in that, I guess in that context, having sex with the right men could have been a way of solidifying political...
But it's also part of a much broader narrative of attempting to, I think, control women through maligning their reputations.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a highly patriarchal society, and the only way that you can place a woman back in a place if she seems to be acting outside of it, regardless of how she's acting outside of it, is to appeal to her sexual misconduct.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is as well, criticizing the sexual misconduct of a woman, you are criticizing the man she's connected to, because she's not supposed to be allowed to get away with that kind of stuff because the man in charge of her should be stopping it from happening. So and it goes all the way back, obviously, into Republican days that women were attacked as a way of attacking men. It's kind of like the ancient version of the your mama jokes.
But she's his only child, and he casts her into exile pretty much for the rest of her life, the rest of her life. And Iulius Antonius, Mark Antony's son, is forced to commit suicide.
Yeah, he's clearly not happy.
Well, it seems pretty fucking extreme. Now, again, everything that we're led to believe about Augustus is he was fairly moderate, at least at this stage of his life. He was fairly moderate. He was fairly disciplined with his emotions, didn't live a very lavish lifestyle. Okay, he built a palace, but apart from that, he didn't walk around acting like a crazy dictator. So this seems to me like an unusually extreme position for him to take because she was fucking around.
Well, he's got to this is the thing. He's set up all this moral legislation to try and control the sexual behaviors of the elite. And if he ignores what his own daughter is doing, well, then it's very much a do as I say and not as I do kind of situation.
Yeah, but there's a big gap between ignoring it and sending into exile for the rest of her life. Not just exile, but like exile where no one's allowed to visit her.
Well,
there's a big gap between those two.
Mum's allowed to.
Mum's allowed to come and see her. It's just mostly the men. It's meant to the male visitors that he's mostly worried about.
Yeah, I think he was happy to get Scribonia out of Rome, quite frankly.
You might read this as a broader political narrative coming out of the Augustan house, because it's not just Augustus that's dealing with the politics of this family. You've also got Livia, and there's no way that she'd be that keen on having Julia around, you would think. This is something that's possibly a tension between Livia and Augustus. So I think there are factions within the family to a certain extent that are built on the different layers of marriage as well.
So let's talk about Livia then. So Livia, obviously, in some of the later sources, gets accused of all manner of heinous things, including pretty much having everyone killed from Augustus on down. How much stock do you put in that depiction of Livia?
Oh, Dr. G is a big Livia fan.
I think she's a savvy political player. There's no question. The trouble, I think, always, from my perspective, is, again, the nature of the source material. It's going to be very hard, I think, to disentangle the way that she's represented as going against what is the expectations of this Roman patriarchal society versus what she may have actually done. Just to bring it back to Tibbo for a moment.
Nice.
Yeah, look at that segue.
Yeah.
So I note that Suetonius records that when Livia does die, Tiberius says that he's definitely coming home to Rome from the island for the funeral. He's going to come, and everyone delays the funeral, and her body is putrid and rotten by the time she's buried because they have to wait for him, but then he never arrives.
Look, they had a very complicated relationship.
He let his mum rot.
Oh, she wasn't going to do that anyway.
That's Livia's fate. And he doesn't let her get deified.
Again, he's very traditional. It would be unheard of to have a woman deified. Tiberius himself isn't even deified.
Everybody else wants it.
Everybody else wants it. Bullshit. Bullshit. You can't tell me that the traditional Roman senators sitting there legitimately want Livia deified. They're just trying to kiss ass as always.
He would not permit her to be deified, which suggests that somebody at least wanted it.
Yes. Somebody was probably trying to flatter one of them.
Although she had requested it.
Again. So what?
Can you imagine Livia writing a letter to Tiberius being like, "Dear son, when I die, I would like to be deified."
Yeah, and he's very traditional.
Can you make that happen?
He'd be like, "No, Mum, no."
Dear Mum, date Tuesday. Location, dungeon.
just on that subject, the deification of people. I'm just in the final weeks of finishing a documentary about early Christianity that I've been working on for the last couple of years. And I make the point in the documentary that the deification of humans in Rome had been unheard of since Romulus, until Julius Caesar dies. And then Augustus says, "Oh, look, I saw a star shooting through the sky. That must be him. He must be a god now."
Yeah.
Then Augustus gets deified.
Yeah.
And then Jesus Christ gets deified by the, sort of Jews, mostly probably Romans, in the middle of the first century. So within a period of a century, you have 3 men that are deified, 2 Romans and a Jew. What do you think's going on there? Why all of a sudden does it become okay for Romans to deify humans? How did that get started all of a sudden?
Oh, I think this speaks very much to Octavian's difficult position in the wake of Caesar's assassination. Like it's definitely a political move, the elevation of Caesar to a deity, and it's about shoring up Augustus's own position, Octavian at that point. And like he's 19, the other two guys who are sort of swilling around are much older, more established power players. He doesn't have much to go on. And he starts to make a claim very early on, once the will is revealed, that he is Caesar, the son of Caesar. So he changes his whole nomenclature outside of like the Roman system traditionally in order to play down the adoptive element and to play up the I'm now the son of Caesar.
And Tiberius is in the same situation, really, because he's also an adopted,
Yeah, and it's like within the month he sees the star and he's like, wait a minute, turns out Dad's a god now. Who'd have thought?
And
I am therefore
and that makes
the son of God.
Yeah, that makes me Caesar, son of Caesar, the god.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what's on my business card now.
Yeah. And Tiberius does the same thing. I mean, Tiberius, he often honors everything he does. I like to say to my students is comes up in the saying WWAD, what would Augustus do? And he makes sure that Augustus is deified, and then he can use that on his coins. He's the son of a god as well. Like it is definitely a political thing there to be able to say that you're the son of a god.
Yeah, Tiberius is all about following what has been said. He's very much about precedent.
Yes.
So he's like, well, Augustus did it with his dad. I guess I better do it with my dad.
I think he also, I honestly think that Augustus and Tiberius must have had a close relationship by that stage. In spite of the ups and downs, they worked together for a really long time. And that last 10 years of Augustus's life in particular, I think Tiberius must have been taking the lead more and more as Augustus got older and frailer. And he was definitely part of Augustus's inner circle. So I think that he probably also legitimately wanted to do his duty. Like Tiberius is like that. Yeah. Play the violins, guys. Play the violins.
How much more are we going to ascribe to his wonderful duty? I mean, can we chalk up everything? Because he does.
He is very dutiful, you have to admit.
But he does have this point where he kind of snaps and he never really recovers from that, and everybody starts to die.
So let's talk about that. What happened? What happened there?
I'm interested in your theory, Dr.
Okay, well,
Mad.
I'm just double checking. You're talking about Capri, right? Not Sejanus. Is that what you're talking about?
I feel like Sejanus is part of it.
Yeah, no,
and Capri is part of it.
Yeah.
But there's kind of this transitional moment where he changes from being somebody who's seeking consensus to somebody who's like, actually, I need to pull down some senators. And then he's very efficient.
Oh, okay. Now we're getting ruthless.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
He changes.
Yeah, well, look, I think that he does get sick of the situation in Rome. He gets sick of, as you say, that the Senate aren't responding the way he wants them to. And I will admit this, and you're going to have this on tape, so here it comes. Tiberius was not a great communicator. I admit that. And so his lack of charisma, his lack of being able to communicate his thought process clearly, or his wants clearly, has led to this situation with the Senate where it's not great. And I think that Tiberius does get a bit sick of it. He goes away to Capri. I don't think he intended at the time never to return. But whilst he is away there, things start to go down south hard with his own family. Agrippina and her two elder sons, Nero and Drusus, are accused of various things, and that's a little bit hazy because we're missing Tacitus, unfortunately, for this point. And then betrayal of betrayals. I mean, Tiberius's life, as far as I can see, is actually a story of loss. He steadily loses the people that he loves, which are not many. He loses his brother very early on. He loses his first wife, who he seems to care about. He keeps losing people.
Oh, and then he's hanging out on roads and he's like, I'd like to come home. I miss my family. And Augustus is like, no, stay there.
Exactly. So his story is one of loss. And Sejanus has become, by this stage, I think, really the person he's obviously dependent upon and that he cares probably most deeply for.
Wow, this is such a sad story.
It is
Man
a sad
without
story.
Any friends makes a friend. Turns out his friend's a killer.
Well, yeah, it does. Like, his friend totally screws him over in the most atrocious way possible. And I think that's what causes him to snap. Like, if you can't trust your BFF, who can you trust, Dr. G? Who can you trust?
Tiberius doesn't need an empire. He needs a therapist.
He does. Cam, what's your take on the whole Sejanus affair?
Yeah, well, look, it reminds me of a little bit about the Piso affair, or piece of shit, as we call him. Did Piso take it upon him, or did he have Germanicus murdered? Question one. Question two, if so, did he do it off his own initiative, or did he? There are suggestions in Tacitus in particular that he did it in a conspiracy with Tiberius, but then Tiberius told him he'd get him off, and then Tiberius went, "Oh, dude, you're on your own. I don't know what's going on here. What? Who? Piso? What? Never heard of you."
Throws him under the bus.
And then he fell on his sword. He shot himself twice in the back of the head while he was handcuffed in the back of the Black and White in the middle of the night. So, I mean, I read the Sejanus story, then I'm like, did Tiberius plot this? Listen, I'm going away for a while. I really hope nothing bad happens to these people that I don't really like Agrippina, who quite frankly is another one of these mouthy women getting around Rome who thinks because she's the daughter of Agrippa, the revered Agrippa, that she can just walk around and accuse me of having her husband assassinated, who was supposed to be the rightful heir to the throne. Does he just plot with Sejanus, then throw Sejanus under the bus like he did with Piso?
No. That's a firm no. I think Germanicus actually died of natural causes. I think he got sick and died. And because things weren't particularly rosy with his relationship with Tiberius, that the suspicion was allowed to creep up. Because Piso fell on his sword for a very good reason. He had actually done the wrong thing. Regardless of what happened between him and Germanicus on a personal level, he does try and take back his province by force, which means he was in trouble. He was in trouble no matter what. Tiberius couldn't deny that he had done that.
He wouldn't have done that without getting the go-ahead from Tiberius first, surely.
I don't know.
Surely.
I don't know.
I agree.
Tiberius can't get anybody to agree to do anything. I mean, I'd say Piso might be striking out on his own as an ambitious sort, being like, Tiberius is not long for this world either. Let's face it, he can't run a place.
Yeah, look, I think Tiberius obviously did send Piso there to keep an eye on Germanicus, who, let's face it, could be a bit of a theatrical person.
I think Germanicus has the charisma that Tiberius lacks.
He does.
And that's the issue.
But sometimes too much so. I mean, God, when he's handling the mutinies, he's like, "Oh, I'm so ashamed. I should fall on my own sword." And he doesn't count on the fact that the soldiers are going to say, "Here, take this. It's sharper." What's he supposed to do then?
Gentlemen, you called my bluff.
Yeah. Oh dear. My pregnant wife. Have you all seen my pregnant wife? And my son, who's in his tiny little uniform.
I couldn't possibly. That would be such a shame.
Okay, I will send them off to be raised by barbarians then. Oh, the shame of it all.
Exactly. Germanicus is kind of theatrical, and so I think he sends Piso along as being, old school. And to keep an eye on Germanicus, but I don't think that means that they conspired to kill Germanicus. I actually think Tiberius wanted Germanicus to live. He's doing everything he's doing for Germanicus and Drusus is exactly what Augustus had done for him. He was quite clearly setting them up to be his successors, and I actually think that he might have stepped down and allowed them to take over if they had lived.
Speculation. We can't give him credit for things that he doesn't do.
Okay,
I'm sorry, Your Honor, I'd like to strike that from the record. When Agrippina gets back to Rome, there's not a lot of, tears and mournful welcomes from Tiberius or Livia.
No,
she gets back
style.
and they're like, he's what?
That's not his style.
Classic Tiberius, not reading the people.
He's a stoic.
He does it. He has low EQ.
He's Queen Elizabeth II, all right? This is Diana all over again.
Oh yeah, well, psychopaths.
Yeah.
I've just written a book called The Psychopath Economy, which is about how psychopaths run the world, right? No, but listen, you can be a stoic and still say, listen, I need to be seen to be doing the right thing here. But he didn't even go to that effort, again, if we believe Tacitus.
Yeah, look, admittedly, I think where Tiberius drops the ball consistently, and again, I will say this, I will admit this, he's terrible with PR. He really needed a PR person on his side. He does not, he doesn't, it's good that he's not he doesn't spend money recklessly, but he was probably a little too careful with money. He didn't put on enough shows. He didn't use coins and buildings and that sort of thing to his advantage. And he didn't use these opportunities that arose during his reign to connect with people. I totally admit that. But I see that as part of his personality. It is unfortunate, but I don't think it necessarily makes him personally, I don't think it makes him a terrible emperor, because I think he was doing the right thing. He just wasn't showing the people the kind of emotion that they always wanted to see.
But this is an important difference. And so I'm wondering what your speculation might be about it. Because if Tiberius, as you say, is positioning himself always in the model of Augustus, why doesn't he embark on a building program? Why doesn't he work on his iconography and things like this? I mean, they're important details that Augustus consistently is working on.
He does have a perspective. Like, he does have his own coins and that kind of stuff that he focuses on, but he tends to use them. And this is what I mean. He's not about the show. In that way, I don't think he can be like Augustus, because it's just not in his nature to be. He's not about the show, and so he tends to use it to emphasize the people that he wants to promote, like Drusus and his connection with Augustus and the kinds of building projects that he does. He finishes Augustus's program. Like, he's
working on some stuff, but nothing ever really gets properly finished.
He did build his temple to Castor and Pollux earlier, though.
Damn straight.
I think Augustus was still around. But I want to get back to this theory that what broke Tibbo was losing everyone he cared about. I mean, I get it, but that was kind of the reality of life back then for everybody. Augustus lost everybody he cared about as well. Every time he had a succession plan, the kids would get to 16, 20 and they'd be dead, and then he'd be like, oh, fuck, now I got to find some more kids somewhere, and he'd go around to the orphanages and look for strappy young lads and do a daddy warbucks on them.
No,
I mean, but it didn't send him over the edge. He didn't go and build a sex dungeon and go, fuck it all, I'm out of here.
Well, he did have a house of virgins, so,
That doesn't sound like as much fun as a sex dungeon.
No. Look, I think the thing is, and this again comes down to the essential difference between the personality of Augustus and Tiberius. I think that Tiberius, being a much more introspective person, I don't think he had as many people that he really let in. And I don't mean to say that, the second his brother was dead, Tiberius's life was over and ruined. I just mean that I think because Tiberius only let a few people in his life, that by the time it gets to, his old age, when he's, pretty much alone and kind of sick of the lack of success he's had with the Senate in terms of getting the working relationship that he wants. He is a bit old and cranky by the end of his life. And then I think Sejanus sort of tips him over the edge, because it is a pretty massive betrayal. Augustus never has to go through a betrayal like that, you have to admit.
Yeah. And how much do you think the death of Drusus, his son Drusus, not his brother Drusus, has to play in this? I mean, traditionally that is given as the trigger for him to just start giving up hope and walking away from it all.
Well, if you want to jump in with Suetonius, apparently he didn't even love his natural child, Drusus.
Oh, that's such bullshit.
Because Drusus was somewhat wild and careless in his manner of living.
Now, I think that's just Suetonius gossip, as usual. Suetonius, as we know, is the Who's magazine of the ancient world. I think actually the thing that really hit him hard, I mean, yes, obviously losing Germanicus and Drusus in such a short time kind of been easy, especially since he was probably hoping that they were, going to shoulder some of the burden, and then they disappear and all he's got left are these kids that are way too young to really do anything
send
useful.
Them out on campaign.
No, they're not doing anything useful. And he's left to deal with Agrippina, which is just dandy. But I think that it's more when he finds out how Drusus apparently died, which doesn't happen until the break with Sejanus. I think that's what gets him. Like the idea that his own son was murdered by this man that he trusted, and in conspiracy with a family member on top of that. I think that has got to hurt.
Yeah. So you would say that helped send him over the edge, and then he really doesn't do much to ensure the succession afterwards.
No, I mean, Gaius is He does in the setup to Sejanus's fall. I mean, he's pretty crafty with Sejanus, you have to admit. He has him summoned to the Senate and in such a way that Sejanus is like, ooh, I'm going to be given some special powers. Yeah, I'm going to be given tribunician power, and this is going to be the sign that I'm going to, have a role, like a real succession role sort of thing. I'm part of the family. This is great. He's
Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. He thinks he's going to be made a madman.
Yeah. And he shows up and instead is denounced on the spot, arrested and executed within a day. So he sets it all up pretty carefully. And when he knows this is all going to happen, he summons Caligula to him to keep him safe. So I think he is in a sense, and he does make sure that Caligula has a quaestorship. And he is also he is given a priesthood, as is his other grandson, Tiberius Gemellus. But I think he did drop the ball, and that I think he probably should have done more given his age. But then again, Augustus and Livia had both lived to be so old. He might have thought he had a few more years in him than he actually did. I mean, even when he started to get sick towards the end, he still was trying to be pretty physical and maintain his old routines. He basically tried to maintain his old routine until he collapsed.
He should have paid attention to his own biological father's side of the family, because real dad didn't last.
Oh, but he was pretty old.
Well, but he died.
Well, okay, I'm sorry. Is that a flaw?
Tiberius was.
Tiberius is only Tiberius was,
Tiberius was 80.
Yeah, he did pretty well.
He was pretty. He was even older than Augustus was 74 when he died. This guy was 80. That's crazy.
Yeah, but Livia lived into her 80s. He might have thought he had a couple more years, but I agree. He should have probably done more, but he was still taking steps that indicate that they were going to be his successors. And he writes in his will that they're both going to be his successors. So, I mean, he wasn't completely checked out. And he's still, to be honest, he's still involved in foreign policy and that sort of stuff. Some of the stuff that he does towards the end of his reign, like Caligula often gets credit for, but he settles things in Parthia and Armenia really quite nicely. So he's not completely out of it. Thank you. Yes, that's right. Sorry, Dr. G's giving me a face like he didn't do that.
All right. Well, we're coming up on an hour. I feel like I haven't really solved the issue here.
How do you solve a problem like Tiberius?
Tibbo. Yeah. He'll never be resolved, I don't think.
I have to say that it's been a lot of fun talking to you. The couple of words that I got in, anyway.
This is why you don't have women on your podcast.
No, I think I'm going to fire Ray and just invite the two of you to come on my show every week, because it's a lot of fun.
Excellent.
Well, so for my listeners, if they're not already listening to your show, where do they find your show?
Oh, well, you can find The Partial Historians just about anywhere where you find good podcasts. We're on iTunes.
And bad ones too, like ours.
Yeah, I didn't say ours was good. Spotify, we're all over the place. Just doing a search for The Partial Historians will bring us up just about anywhere, I think.
And I believe you can do a number of podcasts. Where can our listeners find your various projects?
Oh, well, yes, thepodcastnetwork.com is where we list all of our shows. We do, apart from Tiberius, we're doing one on the Cold War. We're doing one on the Renaissance. We did do a long one on Alexander the Great. We did Julius and Augustus before we got to Tiberius. I did one on Napoleon for many years. We do one called The Bullshit Filter, where we do contemporary news stories and pick them apart for bullshit. We just did 3 hours on the soft coup going on in Venezuela for people that are interested in more contemporary stuff. But yeah, over at thepodcastnetwork.com you'll find all of links to all of our things.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh yeah, a lot of fun. And let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Caligula, I'm sure, is going to, really send us into meltdown.
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, sex dungeons are nothing for Caligula.
Yeah, well, I can't wait. Yeah, so when we get into Caligula, we'll have you back on.
Excellent.
We can do that.
It's a date.
Wonderful. Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your night.
You too. Bye.